security. Yeah.
Got it.
Please,
All right.
Benjamin. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Yuri. Okay, so we talked about gRPC last lecture, and this lecture I wanted to talk about security because I think one of the key problems that we have with distributed systems is the fact that we're running on different machines, which means that the trust it becomes an issue. When you run a program on the same machine, like all the programs running on your local computer, and if they're not talking to anybody, which is very few of your programs, right? Like Zoom right now is talking to another computer. Your web browser is talking to another computer. If you're watching, Netflix in a side screen, then that's talking to another computer. But if you're using the calculator, okay, that might be on your own computer. But so programs that are running on a local machine, they have this kernel that can regulate trust, and everyone trusts the kernel, and it's a nice, clean system to run in. Once you start having distributed systems where computers are talking over the network, that trust is gone. The two computers might trust themselves. There might be some trust between the two computers, but since they're talking over the network, the computers must be able to understand and know who they're talking to, and make sure that their messages are being sent correctly. And usually there's a desire to protect the content of the message, so we want to encrypt them. So this is the subject of today. Okay. So let's just start off. Sorry, I need to share my screen. 1 second. And here we go. All right. Yeah, I'm gonna really like being in person because I'm just not a good Zoom person. All right, here we go. Let's see. Share screen. And here. Okay, this is a lecture from my. Oh, can you see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Okay, so we're going to talk about secure communications, and we're going to talk about it from the point of view of a distributed systems developer. So there's a lot, and since it's only one lecture, I mean, this is a huge subject, we're going to focus on what we use. So we're going to assume that our encryption is implemented correctly, that the algorithms are there. We'll refer to the algorithms, but we won't actually dig into proofs of correctness of those algorithms. We're just going to take for granted that the encryption works. The details are for a whole nother class. So let's look at the problem just to start out with. So you can imagine, like Yuri introduced me at the beginning of this lecture, and because of that introduction, you now believe that I'm Ben from San Jose State, and I'm a professor, and you believe that I know what I'm talking about. So that gave you confidence because of Yuri. Now, if you doubted Yuri, you could go onto the internet and you could look at my webpage. You can look for Ben Reed, SJSU. You could look at that picture and you'd be like, oh, that kind of looks like the guy that I'm listening to right now. And that would also lead you to believe that I was Ben. So we need to find a way to establish that we're communicating to the person that we think we're communicating with over the network. So let's take this example here. Imagine this is a distributed system where you have two people. Again, Yane Hudojnik. I have very simple art in this, right? So we have the person on the left. He wants to talk to Ben. And the person on the right, I'm sorry, we have the person on the right that wants to talk to Ben, and the person on the left that is Ben. So Ben's on the left, and Ben tells the person, hey, I'm Ben. And the person on the right believes them. So this is often how we do casual conversations, like if we meet somebody for the first time. But if we want to do a transaction with Ben, maybe we were supposed to give Ben $1,000, right? So I'm supposed to meet Ben in the park, give him $1,000. I don't know what it's for, but anyway. So we want to make sure that we're giving it to the right person. But of course, anybody could say they're Ben. So, for example, we can have the stick figure with the black hat. Okay, this means a hacker, right? So this is the hacker. The hacker could come in and say, I'm Ben, right? And convince this person in the middle to give them the $1,000 instead of the real Ben. So this whole, identify yourself and believe the person identifying, that doesn't work. So we need something a little bit more robust, something a little bit more secure. So you can imagine one way to do security is passwords. We all know passwords. And we do security with passwords all the time. So we could have a password for Ben. And the password would be, it's me. Okay, so I'm Ben, and my password is it's me. Now, when I come up to the person in the park, I say, hi, I'm Ben, and my password is it's me, right? And then the person in the park would say, oh, you said the right password? You must be Ben. And the person in the park believes. Okay, so this is kind of normal. This is this use of passwords. This is kind of what we do on the internet. But this has some problems. Does anybody want to point out some of the problems with using a password scheme like this for identifying Ben? Like, what's the problem with this password? Oh, go ahead. You can speak up.
Yeah, so I suppose the problem is that the person who is trying to identify Ben should know the password ahead of time, right?
Uh-huh. Right. So the person identifying Ben has to know the password ahead of time, which brings up two problems. One is the key distribution problem. How did that person get my password? Like, how did we get it there? And then there's also the impersonation problem. That person now knows my password, right? So potentially, if I use that password with other people, that person could identify as me. There is another problem that happens. Like, you can imagine if you're meeting in a public place like a park and you're identifying yourself with this password, what would be another problem that we would run into?
No, everybody knows the password.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody nearby knows the password. So yeah, that's a problem, right? So we have the attacker. He listens to the password, and he can impersonate Ben. And he could even do it maliciously, like when he could be in between or nearby, nearer to Ben than the person on the right. And then as I say the password, the attacker coughs. So the person on the right doesn't hear it, but the attacker hears it, right? So now the attacker has the password, and the attacker can be the first one to identify. And so, and this can easily happen over the network. This is why we don't do this. It's really interesting. I want to bring this up in the beginning, but in the early days of the network, of the internet, like when we were just getting the internet going, we were just trying to make things work. Like when we do new protocols, we do TCP, we'd write applications like FTP. As soon as it worked, we'd be like, yay, it works. We can exchange data, right? That's what it was in the early days. And there wasn't a lot of thought to security. Early file transfer protocols, they thought about security in the sense that they had passwords, but the passwords were in clear text, so you could easily overhear them. So we went from the early days where it was, yay, we can communicate, to today where it's like, oh no, the hackers can break into our system and communicate. So we're now at a stage where we really need to pay more attention to security. We need to lock things down. That makes things much more complicated. So we need something better than this, right? So we can encrypt. We can use encryption. So this could be a start. So for example, we don't want to send the password over the network. So instead of sending the password over the network, we can generate a nonce. Does anybody know what a nonce is? I should have done a poll for this, but yeah. Does anybody know? Has anyone heard the term nonce? Actually,
Nonce,
let me write it.
okay, I know it, what it is in blockchain. It's a thing which is generated to make a proof of work and then add the block to blockchain.
Okay,
But
yes,
I think
blockchains
that
use
here
it.
it's like same thing, but it uses to like proof password or something else.
Right. So the way you can remember what a nonce is it's a number, that's what the N stands for, number that's only used once. So generally nonces are random numbers. Sometimes they're counters, but usually they're random numbers. So you just generate a random number and you use it once. Okay? That's the nonce. So so what we can do is when Ben goes to identify himself, he'll say, I'm Ben, and he'll pick a random number. And then he'll encrypt the random number with his secret. Okay, so he doesn't send the secret over the network. He uses it to encrypt this nonce. Now, when the person on the right receives this number and this encrypted ciphertext, the person on the right can then use it's me, the secret, to decrypt that ciphertext and see, oh yes, Ben sent this nonce, this number, maybe 37, and then he sent this encrypted blob. And when I decrypt it, it's 37. So obviously Ben sent the message. Okay. But again, we can have the attacker, right? The attacker can listen to this message. And if the attacker listens to the message, the attacker can replay it. Like it can't it can't encrypt N. It doesn't know how to do that. But the attacker is able to replay the message. And so if the person in the middle doesn't keep track of all the nonces used by Ben, the attacker will be able to successfully convince the person in the middle that they are Ben. Does everyone see that? Are there any questions about this so far? All good? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you please once again clarify? Am I understanding this correctly that the person trying to authenticate Ben already has the secret key, right?
Yes. So the person trying to authenticate Ben does have the secret key. So we haven't solved the key distribution problem. That is still there. And we haven't solved the problem of the person in the middle impersonating me. So that problem is still there. But yes, so he does that. The person in the middle does have the secret.
Okay,
So
thank you.
that's why the person in the middle can decrypt this encrypted version of the nonce and verify that the encrypted version has that generated number inside of it. Okay. So now if you look at this attack, you'll look at the attacker and you'll be like, well, wait a second. That number it's sending across, it's not a nonce because we're reusing it, which attackers get to do. Like attackers get to break the rules. That's what they do. So yeah, so they violate the nonce assumption, but as long as the attack succeeds, it's okay. And so this is an attack that could succeed because it's not practical for the person in the middle to verify every single message or to keep track of every single nonce it's ever seen from Ben. That would be that's not practical. So we need to do better. Okay, can we do better? And we can do better than this. So what we can do, of course, better often means more complicated, which it is in this case. So we can have I send at the very beginning, I send an encrypted nonce. Okay, so I generate a nonce, n+1, and I send it over the network to the person in the middle. Okay, and then the person in the middle decrypts this nonce, and generates their own nonce. So that's n2. So I send 37. The person in the middle gets that encrypted message, decrypts it, and then the person in the middle will take that 37 and maybe add 2 to it. So now it's 39. He'll encrypt it and send it back to me, to Ben. So the person on the left. And now the person in the middle and Ben, they share this secret. They both know N1 plus N2. They both know that. Okay, so now they can start doing a secure channel. They can start using that N1 plus N2 to encrypt all the messages going between each other. Okay, now does that make sense so far? We'll look at the attack on it, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands that we can do this. Are there any questions?
So the server is supposed to decrypt, then add a nonce, and then encrypt the two numbers together, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So the middle person, we'll call that the server. I like that idea. Okay, so that server, it knows how to decrypt N1 because it has the shared secret with me. And so it can get N1, and then it can add another number to it, another random number, and now we have a sum of that random number, and it can send it back to me, and now we have this shared secret. The sum is a shared secret that will change every time we communicate because we're each going to generate a new nonce. And then that N1 plus N2 can now be a secret just for this communication that we can use to encrypt a channel. Okay. So now the attacker, of course, the black hat, the attacker can replay all this. It can watch all these messages and it can replay them. So the attacker can record this Ben and then the encrypted N1. It can record that and it can send it to the server. Now, when the server gets that message, it's going to generate this message we see, this middle message on the right, where it can encrypt N1 because N1 got replayed by the attacker. And then it'll add a new nonce to it, N3. And it will send it back to the attacker, the hacker. Now, when the hacker gets this encrypted N1 plus N3, it can't do anything with it. There's nothing it can do with that encrypted ciphertext because it doesn't know it's me. It doesn't know the password. So when the server starts using this secure channel encrypted with N1 plus N3, the attacker can't do anything. because it doesn't know how to participate in that encrypted channel because it doesn't know N1 plus N3. It doesn't even know N1. So it doesn't know how to communicate. Does that make sense?
Kinda, yeah, that makes sense. And also one more question. So the encrypted sum will be the password, basically, right?
Yeah. So the encrypted sum will be the new like temporary, or we call it ephemeral password. So it's a password that's only going to be used during this one communication. And then once they say goodbye, they just forget everything. And then if they ever talk again, they're going to generate new nonces. And that's going to result in a new password. Okay.
Thank you, yeah.
So now this protocol, okay, this is getting a little bit better. It's also getting a little bit more complicated. But it still has problems. Like we have the key distribution problem. The server in the middle can also impersonate Ben, right, if it wanted to. So there's still some problems with this, but this is kind of the direction we're heading. So we can do better using something called public keys. I'm curious. Does anybody have a good definition of what public key crypto is? So blockchain uses public key crypto. Also, the web browsers use public key crypto. We'll see that in a few minutes. Okay, so public key crypto is different than what's called symmetric key crypto. So with symmetric keys, this is what we used in this picture right here. We had when we did this encrypted communication, each side shared a password. They had the same password. So that's symmetric, right? There was symmetry there. That both the sender and the receiver had the same password, and they knew that password. And even when we came up with N1 plus N2, they both knew that N1 plus N2. Now, symmetric key encryption, it's used for whenever we do large amounts of encryption, like when we send data, we always use symmetric key encryption. So it's used, it's very useful, but we can do better in the beginning. Okay, so before we start using this key, so what we can do is we can replace this "it's me" password, the initial password that we communicate with a password. Instead of using this shared key, we can use a public key. And then once we have that public key, we can negotiate a shared secret that we can do the symmetric encryption with. So let's just look how this works. With public key encryption, instead of the two communicating parties sharing the same key, we generate a key in which the key has two parts. One part is called the private key. This is the part of the key that only the owner knows. And this is very important to keep in mind. Only the owner knows this private key, this secret that corresponds to the key. And then there's the other part of the key, which is called the public key. And this public key, everyone can know. And actually, usually we want everyone to know the public key. So we have a secret that only I know, and connected with that secret is a public part that everyone knows. Okay, so and we can encrypt and decrypt with it. So we can, so since everyone knows the public key, they can use this key to encrypt a message. this will generate some ciphertext, which we're labeling C. So this C is the encrypted message, and the only way you can decrypt that message is using the private key, which only the owner knows. So that using this public key encryption, everyone can send a message to the owner of the private key. And even though everyone sees the encrypted message, no one, including the sender, can decrypt that message. Only the owner of the private key can decrypt it. Okay, that's why there's not a symmetry. And symmetric encryption, when we were doing this back here, this message, this middle message here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but the one on the left in the middle where it says E, it's me, and then we're encrypting N1 plus N2. So that message can be decrypted by either the server or Ben. Either one can decrypt that message because they both have it's me. Whereas in this diagram here, well, in this slide here, this ciphertext that corresponds to the message can only be decrypted by the owner of the private key. Okay? Does that make sense so far? We'll look
Yes.
at how we do it, and then, but if you have any questions, let me know. Okay? All right. So now there is a question. Okay, so here we're using the public key to encrypt, and then we're decrypting with the private key. Well, what if we flip it? What if we like encrypt with the private key and then decrypt with the public key? What if we do that? Like, I mean, that kind of sounds kind of weird though. Like, why would you want to encrypt something why would I want to encrypt something using my private key and then send it out and everybody can read it? That's not encryption, right? That's something different. And it is different. So, and it is, we do this. So if we encrypt, we do the encrypt operation with the private key, we can take a message, use the private key to generate ciphertext, but it's not ciphertext. We don't call it ciphertext. We call it a signature. So we can take that message and generate a signature, and then we can give this signature to whoever we want, and anybody can do an operation with a public key and verify that that signature came from me. So I signed the document. Okay, so these are two very important operations we can do with public-private key. One operation is we can use the public key to send a message that only the owner of the private portion of the key can decrypt. And then, kind of conversely, the owner can use their private portion to sign a message that everyone can use the public key to validate. Okay? So let's look for an example of the public key. So if we wanted to send a message to, if we did this operation where we sent to the server, where Ben sends to the server N1, and it's signed with the private key. So Ben sends to the server this N1. So when we do the operation, when we sign with the private key, that's not confidential anymore. It's public, right? Because anybody with a public key can read this message. However, when they read it, they also know that it was signed by the owner of the private part of that public key. So when the server gets this message from Ben, it can see, it knows the public key for Ben, So it can know, oh, Ben sent me N1. I know Ben has N1. And then the server can generate an N2 and send it back to me, to Ben. Now, when I get N2, no one else can read this message. So no one else can see N2, but I can, because I have the private key that corresponds to this public key, and I can decrypt it. Okay, so now at this point, both of us know N1 and N2, and the server in the middle also knows that N1 came from me. So if it starts talking over this secure channel with this, using symmetric encryption, and it starts talking with me, and we start responding, then it knows it's talking to me because only I know N1. Okay? Now it turns out we can do better than this. Okay? But we're getting there step by step. So there is a problem here. The server knows that it's talking to Ben, but Ben isn't sure that it's talking to the server, right? Like there could be a bad guy in between our communication. So it doesn't actually know, because anybody, since everybody has we assume everyone has a public key. So anybody could decrypt N1, or I'm sorry, anyone sees N1 and knows it came from me. And then anybody could have generated this message with N2. Anyone could. So, but only I can decrypt it, but anyone could generate this message. So Ben doesn't know who they're talking to, but the server does know that they're talking to Ben. Okay. So, so we can actually fix this if we actually have, if both sides have the public key. So the server's public key is known by Ben, and the server knows Ben's public key, and now we can we can do this exchange. And here, where do we sign? Oh, here we're signing the we're signing the sum of N1 and the encrypted version of N2. So when when I receive that second message, I know that second message came from the server because it's signed with the private key of that server. So now in this case, when we talk on this secure channel using N1 plus N2, we both know that each side knows that who the other side is talking to because of these signatures. Okay? So we still have a problem, right? And this is a big problem in distributed systems. It's called the key distribution problem. How do we distribute the public keys? Like, we want the public keys to be out there. We want to distribute them freely. It's not secret. So this is something we want to share. But how do we send them out? And even more importantly than sending out these public keys, the receiver of the public keys, of the public key, needs to know who it corresponds to, right? Because if I send out my public key, but I send out the public key and I say, hey, here's my public key, and by the way, it corresponds to Elon Musk, right? Then I could start impersonating Elon Musk, right? So we need to not just be able to distribute the public keys, but we have to make sure when we do this distribution that the receivers know who those public keys belong to. So this is the key distribution problem. And this is a hard one that we need to get around. So let's look at how we do that. Has anybody used SSH? What is SSH used for?
Yes, I use it. It is a protocol for accessing Linux servers.
Right.
TCP.
So
TCP.
exactly. So it's a protocol for accessing remote servers, and SSH stands for Secure Shell. And it's secure because it's encrypted, right? We know who we're talking to. Now, SSH has the key distribution problem. So when we start using SSH, we have both sides with public and private keys. And when we start an SSH session, it has a little handshake that it does at the beginning that uses the public keys of each side. But for that handshake to work, the handshake has to be sure that the public key corresponds to the server that it thinks it's talking to. So, if I SSH to my super server, right? When I do that SSH to my super server, then the SSH protocol, my client needs to know the public key of my super server. Okay. But when I first communicate to my super server, it doesn't know, right? If it's the first time I'm talking to a server, the SSH program does not know the public key of the remote server. We have the key distribution problem. So how does the SSH do it? So those of you who have used SSH, I'm sure you've done this where you log into a server the first time. How does SSH distribute the public keys?
You mean adding public keys or authorized keys file or?
Yeah. How does it get the authorized keys? No. This is not the authorized keys file. This is the known hosts file. So your SSH client has a file under .ssh called known hosts. And that file has a mapping of a host name to a public key. Now, initially, that file is empty. There's nothing in it. As you start communicating with servers, it learns that, oh, okay, this server has this public key, right? It starts learning the keys. The keys start getting distributed. How does SSH do it, though? Like, how do you know that this public key belongs to a given server?
It has some known host file, I think, on the client end, and on the first handshake, it stores some information about the server you have logged.
Yes. So it starts with that first handshake. So the first time you communicate with a server, like if you've never communicated with a server before, you establish a connection to that new server, and it's going to put the public key and the server name into that known host file. Okay. But before it puts that name and public key into the known host file, it needs to verify that the key is correct, because you could be talking to a bad guy that's impersonating that server, right? You might see this actually. If you've been talking to a server for a while and either you get attacked, like somebody tries to impersonate a remote server, or more often, you reinstall that server and you generate a new public key, then the next time you SSH to that server, your SSH client will say, wait, something's wrong. You might be under attack. I was expecting this public key, but instead I got a different one. So this isn't good, right? So it will say that. However, the first time it doesn't know the public key. So how does it make sure that the public key that it received is actually the public key for that server. Do you remember what happens the first time you SSH to a new machine? What does it do?
It asks
Um,
you whether you want to add the key into
Right.
the bus folder, right?
right.
Exactly. Right. The first time you connect, it says, hey, you know, this server is giving me this key, and here's the fingerprint of the key. It will give you all these like hexadecimal numbers. Is this the right key for the server? Right? And then what do you do?
Type yes.
You say yes. Right. You say yes because you make the simplifying assumption that you won't get attacked the first time you connect to a server, which is a terrible assumption. It's a terrible assumption, right? But it's the only assumption you can make. I mean, what the other thing you could do is like call up the admin of the server and say, hey, server admin, I got this fingerprint for your server. Does it match what it's supposed to be? And then the other side will say, yes, that's correct. And then you'll push yes on the keyboard. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do to be secure, but nobody ever does that. So SSH really counts on the first connection to be a server to be a good connection. Like you won't get attacked the first connection, which is a naive assumption. It's a terrible assumption, but that's kind of what we live with the SSH. Okay, so you're good as long as you don't get attacked the first time. So that's how SSH solves the key distribution problem, is this kind of naive assumption. Now with, let's see. Okay, so with, let's see, yeah, so that's what we talked, yeah, okay, yeah, here's the example of the message you get. It can't be established. Here's the fingerprint. And it gives you like, oh, it's not hexadecimal. Sorry, it's base 64 encoded. So here's this fingerprint. Are you sure? Does that fingerprint look right? I mean, it's a stupid question. Like, how do you know? Who knows what the fingerprint is? Okay, so that's how SSH does the key distribution. Yeah, and then in the interest of time, we will kind of gloss over the details for SSH. So we want to look at something more sophisticated than SSH. And actually, what we're going to talk about is X509 certificates. And the newer versions of SSH also support X509 certificates. So this is a way to do things a little bit more securely. Comes with some trade-offs as well. We'll look at those. But this is kind of the state of the art. Now, in order for this to work, I need to reshare my screen. Give me 1 second. Oh, did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to ask whether, so if I understand this correctly, that the first handshake is unencrypted, right? Because we don't have the public key from the server, so it's unencrypted.
No, it is still encrypted. It's still encrypted. What happens is on the first handshake, the first thing that the server does is send down its public key. So
okay.
it sends down its public key, and then we use that public key to establish an encrypted session. The thing we don't know though is that public key really the public key of the server we think we're talking to? So there is that little hole. But apart from that little hole, everything is encrypted. So we don't have, the other issue.
And also
right,
one more question.
Sure.
Yeah, so in your pictures, your diagrams, it was stated like a secure server, a secure channel. Does that mean that like there is some kind of separate channel, or is that we have to repeat the procedure where we encrypt with the public key and then decrypt with the private key for every message, right? Is the way?
Yeah, no. So what I kind of am alluding to, or what I mean by that, is that after that point, we have, hold on, let me just do this.
So we have basically a password we can use to be sure that, but the data is publicly seen or not.
Yeah, no, the data is not publicly seen. Yeah. So the idea is that once you get a shared secret, you can then use the normal symmetric key encryption, AES, to and SHA HMAC to verify that your
Oh
communication.
yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes
I have one question, but
Sure.
what are the best practices to make the SSH more secure? As far as I know, for example, it is possible to use web servers and like Vault with some Vault secret storage with some additional key that can be used
Yes.
in SSH session. So maybe you
Yes.
can know more about it.
That's
or-
right. Yeah. That's exactly right. So if you have a way of distributing the known host file, then it gets rid of that problem. So with SSH, if you use LDAP or basically any secure way of distributing the known hosts, then you don't run into this problem, because you'll never be prompted for I haven't seen this before. Does this look right? So that is a way to do it. In practice, I mean, unless you have a very controlled environment, in practice that doesn't happen very often. But in highly secure places and in very well managed environments, you can use you can distribute a known host file, and that will solve that problem.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's look at SSL. Let me just click here. So let me see. Hopefully, I can't remember which browser does it. So if we look at this screen right here, you see that on the screen, there's a little lock. And we know two things. So when we use HTTPS, we know that's the secure version of HTTP, right? It has encryption. And we see the lock there. We know that is secured, right? And if we click on the lock, we can actually see how it's secured. So if you look in here in this connection secured, we can see that, okay, it's secured by Google Trusted Services. You do more information, you can actually look at the certificate of this website. So this website is the Google Docs website. And if we look at the certificate here, we can see that the website we're using has a name, this common name of star.google.com. So basically it says this certificate corresponds to anything that ends in google.com. But this server does more than just google.com. So here's a whole bunch of other aliases that like google.es, right? So here's all the other aliases that correspond to the server. So these are the names that we're referring to. And here, down here is the public key. So this is the fingerprint of the public key. And it actually has, I don't know if this shows it. Oh, and here is the public key, right? That for this server. Alexandra, did you have a question?
Yes. Sorry, is it only me who is
Sure.
in the black screen instead of presentation? Or...
Oh, you don't see the screen?
Yeah, I don't. Maybe there's.
I don't know. I rejoined. It works now. It's some Zoom glitch, I guess.
Okay.
Can everybody else see the screen okay?
Yeah, it works fine after rejoining the conference, but after
Oh,
first
that's
when you
weird.
started it was like blank. Yeah, that's right.
I can
I wonder.
I can see it now. Yes.
I wonder if that will mess up the recording. All right. Well, let's hope for the best. Okay. Let's see. So on this screen, you can see the names. This is the names that the server is claiming to be. This is Google, so it has a lot of names that it claims to be. And also, we get the public key. This is the public key. It uses elliptic curve. Yeah, it does have some other things here. One of the really important ones, I guess it's at the top here, is validity. So after December 9th of 2024, this binding, this mapping of a name, well, a bunch of names to that public key is no longer valid. So after December 9th, the certificate is no longer valid. Okay, so when my browser connected to Google, Google sent down this certificate. And in this certificate was the public key. This allowed me to do some public key operations and negotiate a private session key that's shared between the server. And the certificate also told me what the name is. So as long as I trust this certificate, then I know who I'm talking to, because I see the public key and I see the certificate. And I see the name in the certificate. But now the question obviously is, okay, fine. I got this certificate that this basically, this is a binary blob that has all this information in it that says, here's a bunch of names and here's the public key for it. Why do I trust that? Like I get this information down from the server that I'm connecting to, but I didn't really trust the server. And now I'm getting this mapping. How do I trust that mapping? Well, I trust the mapping because this certificate is signed by an issuer. And this is, the issuer's name is Google Trust Services. Okay, so this certificate with all this information is signed by Google Trust Services. Okay, but do I trust Google Trust Services? I mean, it sounds trustworthy, has Google and it has trust, sounds pretty good, but is it really trustworthy? Well, I don't know. I mean, this could just be another certificate that a bad guy generated. Okay, so, but if I look at this certificate, you know, it has an expiration time. Where's the expiration time? Yeah, it has an expiration time. It has a name up here. It has, it has a name right here. It has, and then it has the public key in here. This public key is RSA public key. So it has the name and public key, but again, how do I trust this? Well, it turns out that this certificate is also signed. So if we look at the certificate that signed this certificate, we get to this root 1 certificate, Google Trusted Services root 1. And if we look at the name of the certificate, it's GTS root 1. And the person that signed it was also GTS root 1. So this certificate was signed by itself, right? This is called a self-signed certificate. It's the root cert. It's the very top one. It's the last one we see. You'll notice the expiration date is very far into the future, right? 2036. So why would we trust this certificate? Does anybody know why we end up trusting GTS root 1?
I don't know, but maybe I have one question. Maybe you can answer on it. It will be like it's probably more a rhetorical one, but I'm still curious about your opinion. Do you think that the makers or owners of the internet browsers are in collusion with like so-called SSL vendors? And for example, well, it looks like they're creating some conditions where one or another way have to pay to get the certificate, because I can generate self-signed certificate, even can get a root certificate, but it will be like trusted by Alexander and only, internet browsers will not trust.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yes, what you're saying is correct. I mean, in order for this to work, there has to be collusion. But rather than collusion, we usually use the term working together, right? They have to work together to make this work. So it turns out in the browsers, let me see if I can find it real quick. In all the browsers, you can look at the list of certificates. So these are all the certificate authorities. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch. there's a whole bunch of certificate authorities. When this really first became popular, I went through this list because it's a huge list, and I went through it and I thought, you know what? I want to be secure, so I'm going to delete all the, because you can delete, like you can pick this and you can delete it. So I went through, I spent like an hour on my browser and I deleted all the root certificates that I wasn't sure I trusted. So I was just left with the few that I trusted. And after that hour, my browser did not work anymore. Like every website I went to, it would say, I don't recognize this certificate or the certificate authority that signed this. So yeah, it is an issue. There's a lot of certificate authorities. Some are less trustworthy than others. So it is a very practical problem. But it's also the root of it's how we get security on web browsers. There is also, if you look up, there's a service called Let's Encrypt.
Yeah.
Actually, so
Yeah,
that,
also by class, yeah.
yeah, so that one's free. So
Yes, but it is limited. Like I understand that a lot of SSL vendors provide some functionality like a longer validity and extended validation,
yeah.
or a vault card or everything else, some more trust. But still, I don't understand why we have some regulation for websites, but for example, don't have it for SSH access. I mean,
Yeah. That's because with SSH, we have that hole with SSH. So that first time connecting hole, that assumption we make is not valid. And if you start having financial transactions based on that, you don't want that. Like you don't want the first time you connect to the bank account to assume that it's good, because the attacker will steal all your data. He'll steal all your money, right? So it needs to be stronger. But there is a problem. I realize we're running out of time, so let me just kind of go through this quickly. So the way it works, the way certificates on the web with TLS, this is transport layer security, also called SSL. Your website, so this is Amazon. Amazon will go to a certificate authority and it will say, hey, certificate authority, I'm Amazon. Here's some information about me, and here's my public key. And it packages this in a format called a certificate signing request. So it has all the information in the certificate, but it's not signed. And it sends it to the certificate authority. And then magic happens, okay? Somehow that certificate authority needs to verify that Amazon, the one that sent this certificate signing request, really is Amazon and it's not an attacker. Somehow it needs to do that. In theory, the way it would do it is it would send an agent to the Amazon headquarters and say, hey, I got this certificate signing request. Is this really you? And they'd say, yes, that's us. And then, Jeff Bezos would sign the document, and then they would sign the certificate and everything would be ultra secure. So, but usually it happens through simpler ways. Some certificate authorities look at the credit card that you're paying them to sign the certificate and make sure that the name matches, right? Or sometimes they have a contact at a company. Let's Encrypt. It connects back to your host, your machine, on an insecure port, and make sure that you sent that signing request. But again, since it's doing that verification in an insecure way, it's not very secure, right? It's kind of this naive assumption. So there is one tricky part of certificate authorities is verifying that the signing request really is coming from the person that they are going to certify belongs to that public key. But once the certificate authority is satisfied that this certificate signing request is valid, it's from the entity, the Amazon in this case, it will sign the certificate signing request and send it back to Amazon. And this signed certificate now is it's not secret at all. It's public. And actually, every time anybody connects to Amazon, they hand that certificate back, and that's how the keys get delivered, distributed. Okay. So I know, oh wow, we're over time. So let me just point out, there's this exercise I do when I teach this in my classes, because people don't really understand this certificates, like how these work and the certificate authority. But I found one way to really get a good feel for how this all works is just doing it. So there's a utility that's on all your laptops, Windows, Mac, or Linux, and it's called OpenSSL, and it will allow you to generate a certificate authority. This is the command used to generate a certificate authority. It will allow you to sign a certificate. This is the command you use to sign a certificate. And oh, sorry, this top one will allow you to generate a certificate request. So this is a way to say, look, I want use certificate authority to sign that it's me. And the key here, if we're looking at this first line here, on this first line, this me.key is the private key that never leaves the machine. You don't send it to the certificate authority. If you do, all bets are off. So you always have to keep your private key secret. So me.key never gets sent anywhere. The public key will be placed in me.csr. And then the certificate authority can run this command on me.csr to generate a new signed certificate. And then you could actually use it. So usually when I teach this class, I have this assignment where we designate 3 certificate authority people, and they run those commands. They come up with a policy to verify that the requests they get are really from the student that is requesting the signature. And then they sign them, and then the students will submit a message signed with that certificate. And then the students would get bonus points if they were able to fool the CA, if they were able to fool the CA into signing a certificate that belonged to somebody else, or if the CA was able to convince the requester to give them their private key, because the private key should never come off the machine. Okay. So anyway, if you want to try it, I highly encourage you to run these commands, try it out, be a certificate authority and be a requester, just to really internalize how this all works. Okay. So yeah, I'm sorry about going over time a little bit today. Are there any last questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Is the trusted authorities list only used by the browser, or is it shared by the whole system? So does the browser have a separate list or no?
That's a good question. It depends on the browser. I believe Firefox has its own list. I don't know. One of the browsers has its own list, but most of the browsers use a list in the operating system, because operating systems, they use X509 certificates a lot too for some of the operating systems updates and stuff. So there is a system-wide one, and then some browsers have their own.
And so basically, either you get the list if it, for example, depends on the browser. So you get the list when you install the browser, right? So you cannot be really sure that the list is 100% secure, that there isn't some bad apples in there, something like that, right?
Okay, that's one way to say it. The browser vendors don't say it that way. The browser vendors say, we are giving you the trusted list. So you trust the browser, so you trust the list. So that, but you're right. I mean, there is, if a browser puts in a bad CA, either maliciously or by accident, then it's compromised. We're trusting the browsers to maintain that list, and the operating system vendors to maintain that list correctly.
Thank you.
Let me see. Oh, yeah, my favorite. So, there is there's a security book. The intro to, no, I think it's called Network Security. I think it's called. So I really like this book. It has a good chapter on public key encryption. It's very strong too on the math behind it, which we didn't have time to cover at all. So that's a good one. The classic one is Information Security, I think it's called, by Bruce Snyder. Oh no, I don't know how to spell Snyder. I think that's wrong. But that one is the classic. It's really good. It's a little bit old though, so it doesn't have some of the more updated things. So those are the two good references. And then actually the RFCs for TLS are also, I mean, if you're really going to dig in, then you would look at the RFCs for TLS. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Let's see. Oh, good. Oh, yes. Evgeny.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, just last question. So, am I understanding this correctly that basically symmetric cryptography is faster than
Oh yeah.
public key cryptography, right?
Yeah. That's an important point to make. Yeah, public key crypto is extremely math heavy, extremely slow. So that's why when we use public key crypto, we're just encrypting basically a number to generate a shared secret. The number is usually pretty big, dozens of bytes, but certainly not the megabytes that we're transferring. So yeah, so we only use public key crypto to generate a symmetric key that we're going to then use to encrypt everything else. Yeah.
So one more question. Do you think that the period for which SSL certificate is issued is like equal to the time needed to hack it, or like if you have very powerful machines that can in machine way get the private key using some data between.
No, I think you're partially right. But it's not. It is kind of like the time required to hack it, but not hacking the key. Usually, the way private keys are compromised is you compromise the server that holds the private key. The problem with private keys is when our program is running, it needs to use the private key. So that means it has to be accessible to the program all the time, which means it needs to be stored somewhere on the server. And if it's stored somewhere on the server, if you hack into that server, you can get the private key. So, and that's a lot faster than trying to break it. Yeah. So because of that, the time really is about how secure the machine holding the secret is. So you'll see front-end servers, the ones that are interacting with the users, those front-end servers generally have short key span lifetimes. Usually it's few weeks of lifetime for the server, for that
So,
key.
so basically, cryptographic encryption is strong enough, and it is impossible to brute force a private key for an SSL
Oh.
certificate.
Yeah. If you pick a big, if you make the key big enough, which most people do nowadays, yeah, it's not really practical to break. I mean, there is, quantum computing that's coming that sounds pretty scary, that might be able to break it, but right now it's not practical to break.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the keys with the longer lifetimes, like the one we saw, the root certificate key, that the server that has access to that key is extremely hardened. Like it's extremely protected against hacking. And again, it's the server that's protected. So yeah,
Thank you.
Evgeny.
Thank you.
Could you give at least an approximation? When can we expect like sufficiently powerful enough quantum computers to crack the current setup we have? Or is it really hard to answer?
It's hard to answer. I'm kind of on the skeptic side. So my answer would be, a couple of decades and maybe never. But I was skeptical about machine learning, and look what happened. So yeah, so I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows at this point. There's some people that are very optimistic about it. It'll be interesting to see, but I don't know. I think it's good to start preparing for it just in case, though.
And also one more question. Am I understanding this correctly that like the things you described, so that you have to be able to sign with to encrypt with the public key to encrypt with the public key, to decrypt with the private key, to sign with the private key, and to verify with the public key are the key aspects of an algorithm that is sufficient for public key cryptography. If it doesn't do all of those things, that's not an algorithm that can do that, right?
So you will see that there's some, like RSA, the RSA public key algorithm can do all of those things. It can do all of them. Other algorithms cannot. So for example, there's Diffie-Hellman that we'll see later that's used quite often. That one can only encrypt. It can't sign. However, there is a version of Diffie-Hellman. It's related to Diffie-Hellman, called DSA, Digital Signature Algorithm. It uses the same basic math properties, but the actual operations are different. That one can only sign. It can't encrypt. So there are public keys that can only do encryption, and there are some that can only do signatures. And there are some that can do all four.
So can you use only RSA for this setup, or also other?
Yeah, RSA will do all of them. I think there's other ones as well that they can do all of them. I think what's becoming, well, we'll talk a little bit about Signal. It's the encryption behind WhatsApp, and I think Viber uses it too. I think actually Telegram might use it, but it's called the double ratchet protocol. It uses Diffie-Hellman extensively, and it also uses DSA. So yeah, so there's a mix. You in practice you see RSA. I think RSA is kind of on the way out because the key sizes, actually what I think Alexander was referring to earlier, the key sizes keep getting bigger so that it's harder to like crack them. So it's just more bytes to store, where if you use Diffie-Hellman, there's a version of Diffie-Hellman that works with elliptic curves that allow you to have much smaller keys that are harder to break. And so that's kind of where people are going.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I will not. Yeah, I won't be covering how CAs are used in YubiKeys. You know what? It's been a while since I looked at the YubiKey protocols, but I don't think they use CAs. They use public keys, but I don't think they use CAs, if I remember correctly. But I'd have to look at it more closely. But I wouldn't. We just don't have time to cover YubiKeys. It is that the whole passkey thing is interesting and would make a great topic. But that's more of a network security topic than distributed systems.
Could we also maybe get our hands on the presentation to practice the commands, for example? Or...
Yeah, I will. Oh, actually, I guess Yuri, if I send you the presentation, you can send it to
it would be
everyone,
nice if you
right?
could send it like into the chat or something.
Yeah. Oh, yes, actually. Let me do that right now. Well, one second. Let's see. Up. Okay, go here. Share. Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to in person. So I'm very much looking forward to next Wednesday to meeting you all. Oh, wait. Given, can you say that private keys are given? Oh, yes. Okay. This is an important question. So private keys, in order for this to work, in order for the whole security model to work, private keys have to be generated by the client. So, and that client. So when you're connecting with a using the browser, it will be in the browser, and the site. If the site for the site's public key, it will generate its own key. But basically, whatever is going to use that key is the one that generates the key. If somebody else tries to generate it, then the system's compromised. So the private key should never leave the owner. Only the owner should know the private key. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. You said that the private key should be generated like using different information such as nonce, if I'm not mistaken. And when you showed the presentation, I saw a function #2586, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. How much did it take in space? 32 bytes or no?
No, so oh, I think you're referring to the SSH, where it said it showed the SSH SHA hash of the fingerprint. I think they called it the SSH fingerprint. Actually, let me just go to that slide just to make sure that this is the one. I think it's this slide you're referring to. This is the slide you're referring to, right?
Maybe
right
a little bit later.
Oh, was
Okay.
it
Something like
Oh,
this
this right here.
slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so the thing when you do signatures, even when we write the description, when we do the protocol description, we say we sign the message, but in reality we don't sign the message because the message is too big, and doing public key operations on large amount of data is too slow. So we never actually sign the message. What we do is we generate a hash, a digest of the message, usually using SHA-256, right? So we generate a digest of the message, and then we only have 256 bits, which is, I can never do that math fast enough. I think it's 16 bytes. No, it's not. 64 bytes,
I think
is
it's
that right?
32. No.
32. Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're right. I think it is
because
32.
when
Yeah.
I do my laboratory work from blockchain, we also generate hash for blocks using this function, and
Yeah.
it also in 32 bytes.
Yep, that's right. You're right. So yeah, so basically that what you're going to take any arbitrary document, so any arbitrary size certificate, you'll hash it, you'll get 32 bytes, and then you're going to sign those 32 bytes. So you're signing the hash of the document, you're not actually signing the document itself. But when we talk about it, we say we're signing the document, even though we're actually only signing the hash of the document.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
And I'll see you next Wednesday. Sereda? Is that right? Sereda?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. All right. Oh.